Hi everyone, Tea Drinker here, and today I'm reacting to Shogun, episode 3. Alright, here we go. So I was 5 minutes into recording this episode and then realized the audio stopped recording for some reason, so I'm recording it again. And I could have faked it, I could have just pretended to react, but I'm not going to do that to you. I wouldn't betray your trust like that. So seeing as I've seen this bit before, I'll just take the time to say now, I'm really looking forward to seeing more of Yabushige's character. I find him very, very fascinating. Like, he's clearly a very troubled character, to say the least, but from a storytelling point of view, I do find him very, very interesting. This shot of the sunrise on their faces, them literally waking up to a new morning, brilliant. Okay, so from this point onwards, I haven't seen this episode. Apart from the opening title, which was in the last episode as well. Very excited to see what's going to happen. Tomorrow is tomorrow.
We're on the wind tonight. A pilot. You're still alive. I'll be fucked.
It's very interesting to see how Rodriguez works in the midst of all this.
Oh, no, God, what did he say? What did the warlock say?
Is there going to be like a relationship between two of them? I hope not.
It's not a warlock, he's most certainly a pimp.
Would you prefer a male companion?
Dear God,
That was good. That was a good bit of comedy there.
who's he?
Not to be that guy, but did the word pimp like exist back then? I hate that man. You be nice to her. Oh. I need to learn about the history of Japan and Korea. I know nothing. He looks cool. What is going to happen on this journey? It's going to be so interesting. I like you, Kiri. Surely there's not going to be an attack. Yeah, no, like he has very few men with him. There couldn't be an attack. Those horses are gorgeous. Oh. The political niceties they have to go through. Yeah, I bet you do. The music does a great job just nestling there in the background. I love the music itself as well, like the actual aesthetic of it is really, really great. It's fantastic as well to see the perspective of Eastern culture regarding Western culture as barbarians. You don't get to see that a lot in media. Oh my god, that shot is fantastic.
As a hostage, he learned one truth. That enemies are everywhere and friends nowhere.
Oh, yeah. Smart of him to be thorough.
No one's going to stop him.
What's going to happen? Oh my god, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing?
Peering into ladies' private quarters? It's not proper! Worse than that, it's vulgar!
What the fuck are you doing?
Am I the only man present who treasures the purity of a woman?
This guy is mad!
No! Woman's virtue is our glory! A blight on us all! My God, the shame of it! Your hair looks like the tail of a pony!
I watch Shogun for the serious historical realism. What an absolute chancer. I'm just trying to imagine what that must have been like for the actor playing Blackthorn on set that day. Oh, that shot is fantastic. I'm just so in love with the scenery of this show.
The clouds and the rain.
It means...
Thank you, I understand the metaphor. I've just never heard it put so poetically. Especially by a married woman.
See, I like their relationship, but I hope it doesn't end up being romantic.
Do you have children?
Yes.
Does he?
My boy Tudor.
Oh, I don't think he's coming back from that one. Oh! Oh! It was very smart to try to ambush them at night in the middle of the forest. This is crazy. Jesus, Toranaga has such tenacity to carry out a plan like this. Oh my god. The effects are very, very well done. What's Blackthorn gonna do? That was crazy. Are they gonna be attacked while they're on these rowboats? Oh, is he gonna be left behind? No. Yabushige is correct, but it's still awful to watch. Oh, and the music doesn't make me feel good. Huh. Oh my god. Oh, the fact that this is based on reality is hitting so much harder. Oh my god. Curious as to what's going through Blackthorn's head with regards to the ship.
If you leave without clearance, you'll ruin any chance we have left at diplomacy.
Clearance is the least of your worries at this point, boys.
Quite a show upstairs.
Yeah, you can say that again. I love seeing that actor so much. I miss him so much from Lost. I miss Lost in general. Oh.
How's your leg? Fine. How's your mother? Dead. Behold.
What's he gonna offer?
He's giving us a church in Edo.
Interesting. Okay, they're all starting to come together now. What else is gonna happen? It's not gonna be that simple.
Just one more thing.
Yeah, what's the one more thing?
Pilot, he stays behind.
Yeah, oh, that ain't happening. But I'm trying to think what Toranaga's plan here is. He's not going to just abandon Blackthorn like that, is he?
You black-eyed son of a shit-fested whore! Your lips are the devil's arse! They're on your mother's first!
Juvenile as it is, I actually do very much like the banter between those two men. Are they ships? Or just, oh, rocks.
Let's see him right out of this one.
Yeah, what are you gonna do now, dude? But they're not gonna have time to avoid a collision, surely. Oh! Is it gonna work?
Sink me or let me pass, but make up your fucking mind.
Oh! Way too close, way too close! Is he gonna go directly into it? This dude's crazy! That's a fantastic shot. I'm so curious as to what's gonna happen now. Like, what are they gonna do? Ah, so now there's gonna be conflict between these two.
戸田広松殿が伝言を持ってお見えにござりまする。
What's Hiromatsu's conversation gonna go like?
申し訳のないことと存じ上げたとます。
So if there's only 4 regions left, is that going to create infighting?
決は5人の大老において決すべしとお定めになったはず。4人様しかおいでになりませぬな。
So what, are they going to succeed on a technicality?
敵も味方も駆け引き次第この世で頼むべきは。
I think the character of the son acts as a great foil for Toranaga's character there.
It is a very difficult season in Japan.
Try England. No yesterday. No tomorrow.
Tomorrow is tomorrow.
They prove you are a pirate.
So is Toranaga going to use this as leverage now to keep Blackthorn around?
これを訳させるには暗示には一つの隊を鍛えそなたの船の武器を用いてな
Wow,
Like you to
excellent.
command a regiment in
Tell him it would be a great honor.
謹んでお引き受けすると申しております。
He's taking two right away?
Export exchanges, the return of my men and my ship.
仲間の船乗りと船は
Is that possible?
よって暗示を 旗本に任ずる。
I got a chill when he said that.
旗本。
安心に一緒に泳がぬかと聞いてくれ。
Observational learner.
God, he must have been freezing shooting that.
How many more times must I do this?
Until he is satisfied.
待て。
Is he going to try it now? Yeah.
浜まで勝負しようと申したら、安心は乗るかの。
My lord would like to race you to the shore. But I warn you not to let him win.
The music is so great in this show. Oh my god. And pause. I cannot believe that was 53 minutes. I cannot believe that was 53 minutes. That just felt like half an hour. I swear. Oh, that was really, really great. And that's pretty much it for the reaction. And now here is the review. Okay, so this review is going to have a bit of a different format than the previous two. If you watched my previous two reactions, you will have seen that I did a scene-by-scene analysis of each episode, and doing it that way, it was great because I was able to get so much from, of course, the rewatch process, but also just talking out loud and seeing what's happening with the characters. I think it was really, really great to just be able to see what ideas and what connections come from that. But to be honest, I don't think it's necessary for this point onwards with the show. I've seen now the first 6 episodes of the show that have been released. So with regards to shooting the reviews for these next couple episodes, I'm instead just going to go in a way scene by scene, but I'm really just going to talk about the highlights rather than going really too in-depth with it. How I did it before was just rewatching the episode, and then after each scene I paused it, talked about it, and jumped back in. And not even necessarily for the amount of time that I was spending doing that. I'm just not sure if it's going to be that necessary, if it's going to be a case where I'm kind of repeating certain bits. And so with that idea in mind, I just have my notes in front of me, and I think I'm just going to talk about them one by one. It's going to be a lot more laid back than what I've been doing so far. If you've checked out maybe my first 2 reactions to Cowboy Bebop, that resulted in me just talking for about 5 to 10 minutes, maybe even 15 minutes after rewatching the episode. Whereas with this, I've written down the notes, still kind of scene by scene, but at the same time, this review isn't going to be very, very long. I really intend for this to just kind of get at really the meat and potatoes of what I took from each episode. So, be that as it may, the very first scene in which we see Hiroshige and Toranaga looking at the sunrise with one another, and I said it in the reaction itself, but I mean, come on, with visual metaphors, having 2 of the big characters, with Toranaga, of course, being the secondary protagonist, having both of them look at the sunrise, looking at what is about to happen, at the new dawn that's literally rising on both those characters, I just thought was so strong. I thought it was great how Yabushige seems to want to expand his prospects rather than seek the throne itself entirely. And Toranaga, to a degree, wants that as well. But as I said in episode 2, Yabushige is very much more power hungry than Toranaga. But again, he wants to expand his fief. He wants to expand kind of what he already has, rather than seeking overall power. And even though we do get a sense of the brutality of Yabushige, he is still very similar to Toranaga in that he seems to be a lot less conniving, even though he has been illustrated to us as a character that is very much playing both sides, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on. Nonetheless, he still comes across to us, at least from a storytelling point of view, as not necessarily a villain. He's very much being portrayed as an ethically grey character. Yes, he has this fascination with brutality and death, but it seems to come from a place where it's not necessarily about like torturing other people. It's just that this is a reflection of what the mentality of a person within this environment would almost have to be in a particular way. So in that regard, I think he acts as a great contrast to the character of Toranaga, and in just a way that he is comparable with both of their mutual desire to survive this war and their desire to kind of come out on top, but not necessarily to be the top person, not necessarily that either of them are seeking the title of shogun or anything close to that, but it's just more so they are trying to survive more than they're trying to actually fill their pockets, if that's the best way to put it. After that, we just had a short scene with Captain General with the Jesuits and Rodriguez. It sets up the succeeding plot for the rest of the episode very nice. And again, just having a character like the Captain General and seeing the back and forth he would have with the Jesuits is just a nice little bit of world building that they were able to reinforce with that regard. Next scene with Blackthorn and Mariko. I thought, again, that was great how that tied in with what had just previously happened with the Captain General and the Jesuits, and that given that this episode is succeeding the assassination attempt on Blackthorn, and then for Blackthorn to think that it was the Jesuits themselves who hired the assassins, it's great just how the bit of world building from the previous scene will then tie in with Blackthorn's characterization as a result. And again, there was the great insight into the cultural differences with the conversation all about pillowing that happened there. Like the way Mariko is talking about that, and she tries to describe it in a way that's beyond amicable. She's describing it in a way that is just so pure, so... Oh, what's the word I'm looking for? Purity is the main one that comes to mind. Kind of in a celibate way. She's even trying to describe the act of pillowing, and then Blackthorn's quite vulgar response to that was very, very entertaining. What was entertaining for much less humorous reasons was seeing the continuation of Fuji, where she receives the remains of both her husband and her infant child that have been killed. Again, it's great that the show is very much, regardless of how much they want to bring Fuji into the story in future episodes, it's again just reinforcing the cause and effect of the world. It is showing that actions have consequences, and even if this was the very last time we would even see Fuji, just having small moments like that where we can see that what happens in this world kind of stays in the world, for lack of a better way of putting it, I thought was very, very strong in that regard. But then also from an emotional point of view, I don't know how much necessarily you could see it on screen during my reaction, but like seeing those two boxes side by side with one another, it definitely was harrowing, just to use that term again. And then after that, we had quite a large scene in which it was preparing to leave for Anjiro itself. We saw there was a couple of things that happened there, one of which was Buntaro, who's Mariko's husband, seeing him scolding the son for being so attached to Mariko and that he's basically not being enough of a man yet for doing stuff like that. Why that's so relevant to a story such as this is pretty self-evident. Probably don't need to go into it much there, but I did have to highlight it nonetheless. And actually, I suppose as a bit of a contrast to that, we had Toranaga's older son, Nagakado, his brashness towards wanting to kill Jozen right there and then. That was contrasted very well, in which the older warriors have a much stronger emotional resolve during that sequence. They did not at all want to seek violence. They're very much doing what both Toranaga and Mariko do very well, which is maintaining their composure, keeping the stiff upper lip and playing off everything as civil as they can. And I suppose, just for lack of a better term, very much playing the long game in that regard. A game that, for obvious reasons, Nagakado has not learned yet. And having him there acting as a contrast to the older members, to the older warriors, ends up reinforcing their characters very, very well as showing us a little bit more of Nagakado himself. Yeah, and I have written down as well, just because that moment directly follows what was happening with Buntaro, it means that we can see in a way he's kind of learning, as a teenage boy, he's learning more from Buntaro rather than Toranaga himself, which I thought was very, very interesting. The quote from Lady Kita where she says that she's leaving because there's too many assassins in Osaka, like looking directly towards Lord Ishido when she says something like that. The dramatic irony of that and the kind of coy look on her face when she says something like that, I thought it was really excellent. And as well, just then towards the end of that scene where we had the use of the pregnant lady for a distraction, I thought was very well done. They kind of have like a blink and you miss it moment in which you see like Toranaga within the cabinet, for lack of a better term. I don't know what that's actually called. Suppose you could call it a carriage. It looks very much like a cabinet more so than anything else. Be that as it may, wherever it is Toranaga is residing within, you get that scene done so quickly, and Blackthorn looking down. It does a very good job of building suspense and also adding legitimacy to the idea that whatever it is that Toranaga is doing at this moment, it is something that he has very much thought long and hard about doing, because he would not put himself into harm's way in this kind of a regard otherwise. I'm going to show you my Santa Claus. I don't know if this will keep in the edit. You know what? I'm going to include it. Very refreshing. It's great to see how conflicted Yabushige himself was. This is what I was alluding to just a few minutes prior, in that he is torn between the two worlds of Toranaga and Ishido. And towards the end of that like overall scene, from Mariko to say to Blackthorn to show true heart is to risk your life. That did such a good job, and that comes up again later towards the very tail end of this episode. But just for that to immediately follow what was happening with Yabushige, I think was very, very strong. And all of this brings us to definitely one of the more fascinating scenes of Shogun thus far. It's a scene in which Blackthorn is causing a scene as a means to an end of getting everyone out of Dodge. It was a great moment of dry humor. I was kind of thinking, especially during the rewatch, thinking of Blackthorn, what he's doing in moments such as that, and is that he very much brute forces his way through social interactions. Like the way he's presenting himself, it's a very blunt way of going about things. It's very much a case of him trying to like headbutt his way through an obstacle. And whilst one could certainly make the argument that it's far from the most esoteric or cerebral response to a situation, it's the one that works. So how could you really say it was a stupid plan if it worked that well? I suppose because what was happening there, and of course happens later on with the episode with him steering the ship, is that it's very, very risky. And it's very much him putting it all on the table. It's certainly a gamble for him to do something like that. But as it stands, if he is willing to put his neck out there, in a way very literally, in that he could have been killed for that, for all we know. If he's willing to put his neck on the line like that, and it pays off, well, that is how you survive. And I think that having a character like Blackthorn do something like that as a response to what both Mariko and Toranaga have been saying to him, which is that death is truly around every single corner, well, in a way, here's Blackthorn adapting to that world whilst maintaining his own level of characterization. And for me personally, I very much like the character and as well the actor playing Blackthorn, but again, through rewatching, I thought to myself, he's not going to be for everyone. I mean, I can definitely see why his characterization with regards to the performance, not the internal characterization, I mean like the outward characterization of Blackthorn, his mannerisms, his vocabulary, and again, the way in which the actor performs that character. It's definitely a lot. It could definitely be described as extra, but for me, I think it's clear that the showrunners very clearly know what they're doing there, and personally, I'm a fan, but I do have to mention how I could understand why it's not going to be for everyone. So leading on from that, prior to the actual ambush in the woods itself, I found the dialogue between Blackthorn and Mariko to be very, very enjoyable. It characterized both of them very well. If I could add a slight criticism, but it's not even necessarily criticism, it's just me talking about a particular apprehension that I have. Personally, I'm a little bit fatigued of shows, movies as well, but more particularly with shows in which the female protagonist kind of ends up romantically involved with the male protagonist. Like the female protagonist will be introduced as being quite nuanced, having a bit of backstory, having a bit of personality, and then to see her kind of then get streamlined into being romantically involved with the male protagonist. At this point in time in this episode, we don't know exactly where it's going, so I can't really comment too much as to whether or not it's something that will or won't end up going to a particular place, and whether or not there will or won't be very mature payoff for that. But nonetheless, just from that scene in and of itself, with her very clearly showing an interest in Blackthorn, it's clear to see that they are planting a bit of a seed for that. But be that as it may, from the rewatch, even though I wasn't mad about it on the initial watch, from the rewatch, I gotta say, it did actually happen in a way that was very organic. It was very in line with the characters. So, to be honest, I'm really not going to criticize it that much. I do just want to note that it's something that in other shows I'm a little bit sick and tired from seeing, but in Shogun, they seem to have pulled it off in a way that just seemed very natural, what I gotta commend. And then as for the ambush scene itself, with Kuriyama's character being comfortable with all these other men killing each other, seeing a bit of a civil war break out, for lack of a better term, in the forest, I thought was very entertaining. And I gotta mention the production as well for that sequence. Oh my god, like seeing it all lit seemingly by the torches in the woods. Of course, in real life, they wouldn't have done something like that. They would have had a combination of digital and production practical effects in order to pull something like that off. But nonetheless, I gotta commend the show for being able to depict very, very dark scenery and to use very subdued cinematography in that regard, but it still just looks absolutely beautiful, as opposed to other shows that might try and portray something as being very dark and gloomy, and it just leads to us as audience members wanting to turn up the brightness on our screen. Here, I think it works very, very well. I think it paid off quite well, kind of taking a bit of a risk with the photography and that kind of scene, especially as I said with the first two episodes, using that like fisheye camera angle. I like, it's definitely a choice. Like, it's definitely very, very bold of them to try to do something like that, but for me, it just works really, really well. And speaking of what pays off, you have the rising tension paid off, and that immediately after that ambush scene, we see our group now heading off on rowboats, and immediately more men come through. We see them storming through the city, going right towards Toranaga. We get that wonderful top-down view of all the torches lighting up the alleyways like a little maze going on. It's like just seeing them kind of flow from top to bottom of the screen just worked really, really well. It emphasizes that actions do have consequences in this world as well. This one is a little bit more obvious. I mean, it's something that you could infer was going to happen anyways, but I think for me, just the fact that it happened so suddenly after we think as an audience that we're out of dodge, because we get that little bit of banter between Blackthorn and the captain who he recognizes, and then all of a sudden hear the men rushing towards the rowboats. I thought it worked very, very well. As such, I also thought that Buntaro having to sacrifice himself for the sake of Toranaga, just great world building, great reinforcement of not only the literal world that they're in, but how this also ties into, well, of course, figuratively, the themes of the show, but of course, the fact that this is a historically accurate show, from what I understand. There's been a lot said from the producers. The main guy who plays Toranaga is produced for the show, and he said that he wanted to depict as historically accurate of a portrayal of 17th century Japan as he could, and having that moment of where Toranaga recognizes Buntaro, he gives a very slight bow, illustrating the tradition of Japanese samurai culture, and again, their proximity to death at all times. I just thought worked really, really wonderfully. I loved that moment. Following that, we had Blackthorn, again, getting a little bit of dry humor, and that Blackthorn is presenting Lord Toranaga to the Portuguese. I thought it was great in that, again, it's great how the show depicts the politics and the interactions with the specific factions, in that it just shows the same groups kind of interacting with one another over and over again. Rather than giving us like 8 or 10 different groups to follow and keep track of, it focuses on about 4 that weave in and out with one another, which to me works just so effectively. The slow pace of the show, the slow episodic pace of the show, for me is a great advantage in that it gives more space to allow for the drama to come from the historical events themselves. The show has to be this political and this this characterized on an individual level in order for it to work. And whilst I can understand for some the show would be so slow for them in that regard, for me, it just works really, really well. I mean, it's great to see how Toranaga attempts political negotiation with the Portuguese now that his back is against the wall. And it's great how they present him with the idea and compromise, and that in order for Toranaga to get what he wants, he has to give up Blackthorn. Just another example in which Blackthorn has, well, in one way, Blackthorn is like the bargaining chip, and Blackthorn is being thrown back and forth, so it's kind of great external conflict for him. But for Toranaga, it was another reinforcement of how he is a character who is savvy enough to know that he has to play the long game in these situations, that it is down to him to have the emotional wherewithal to put what he wants at bay in order to get what he needs. Just, really, really great stuff in that regard. And then, when Blackthorn does decide to travel alongside T's clan of his own accord to man the galley, first of all, just again, getting the back and forth between him and Rodriguez shouting back to one another, it's so vulgar and childish the way they're characterized, but I just think it works. I think, again, for some people, I know it's going to come across as a little bit too crass. It's going to come across maybe as a little bit too forced, but I don't know. I think it just works with me. I think it shows, in a way, for as, blunt as it is, it in a way adds a bit of relatability to us as an audience, in that even if the terminology itself may not have been historically accurate, maybe it was, I don't know, if these people were just to be portrayed as very, very stoic and very, very intense and very, very, we are fighting a great war against death every step of the way, it would make the characters seem too one note. So to have the likes of Blackthorn and Rodriguez call each other this, that, and the other as a means of showing, in a way, their stoicism throughout the world, I thought works really, really well. As for Blackthorn himself, I think both within this scene and with so much we've seen of him before, he's very much walking a thin line between bravery and stupidity, in my opinion. Even to get that close-up shot of him where he's saying, either sink me or let me pass, but make up your mind, like him saying that, it both in a way to Captain General as well as the rocks right in front of him. It's great to see how Blackthorn, he doesn't necessarily have, like, let's say, a high opinion of himself, but he is very, very confident. It's kind of like in episode 1 where he describes him and his other men as being shit-stinking Englishmen fighting the Portuguese. It's like he's very aware of his place in the world in a way that works both as a way of humbling him, but also as a way of empowering him, which in a way can be seen as a great contrast in comparison to the likes of Toranaga himself, of that brand of stoicism, in which they contrast with regards to, both men contrast from one another with regards to how they navigate civility, but how both of their approaches ultimately lead to them being empowered and them having a resolve within themselves, and ultimately, in a way, a sort of ethical conduct. I just think it's so fascinating. There's so much that this show is doing with regards to showing us how both cultures regard the other as being barbarians, but within the show itself, and then also for us as audience members, how there's a level of reconciliation and admiration there. I just find it so strong. Going back to, I suppose, the civility of Toranaga, in the next scene we see Hiramatsu meet with the regents, with regards to the political savviness of Toranaga, who effectively creates a stalemate with the impeachment as a means to an end of then buying himself more time. Having so much of how Japanese culture and politics works with maintaining this level of law and order, and how it's almost the predictability of the law and order that can be so scary. It's always characterized as it's the unknown that's so scary in this world. Well, then you have the Japanese judicial system, you have the Japanese culture in 17th century, in which knowing exactly what is going to come in a way is like what's scarier, the enemy you can't see or the enemy you can that's right in front of you? Well, if the enemy you can see that's right in front of you is going to be a Cthulhu, if it's going to be this otherworldly abyss, nearly you could call it, that's what so much of the Japanese culture seems to represent in a way. For lack of me having a better example of a mythological force right off the bat rather than Cthulhu, I couldn't think of a Japanese one off the top of my head, but be that as it may, to move on. Toranaga saying to his son that he only has himself in this life, that tied back very, very strongly to what Mariko said near the episode's beginning to Blackthorn. And, that previous scene ties in rather well with what comes next with Blackthorn, telling Mariko that he abandoned his family for the horizon, how he admires the horizon more than the deep, and he admires the freedom more than the actual horizon itself. In a way, kind of not dissimilar to Yabushige. The show doesn't necessarily depict him as a villain, but they definitely don't depict him as a hero, because no matter what way you looked at it, he did abandon his family. And whatever you could say about the way things were back in the 17th century, even the way in which he talks about women, he's not exactly going to be male feminist of the year for the way he talks. But at the same time, you can see that the level of respect and the level of compassion he does have for women isn't operating as a means to an end of him trying to uphold some social performance. That the compassion, the inherent compassion he would have for the likes of Fuji and Mariko is very, very genuine, and it is sincere, and it is a reflection as to his ethics. Now, again, could there be an argument to be made here that the bar is very much on the floor? Of course there could. But I think that depicting the way misogynist patriarchal cultures are through the lens of a person who is very, very naive, this is Blackthorn I'm talking about now, depicting that through the lens of a person whose perspective is going to be very flawed and is going to be very naive and at times just flat out wrong, but at the same time is trying to approach it in a way that he's operating just within the realms of what he knows. In a way, whether or not you can say this justifies the actions of Blackthorn or justifies his worldview, that doesn't really matter, because it means that whatever worldview is presented at him and whatever worldview we're going to get back, it's going to be so genuine then for the audience. It means that we're going to get a depiction of patriarchy and a depiction as to the oppression of women in a way where it's not going to come across as though we're being lectured or it's trying to, deftly connect it back to what happens in the 21st century. It means that whatever is being depicted is going to work organically for the story, but also if they are trying to send a message, if they are trying to depict something very nuanced, then it works. So for those reasons, being able to combine the macro representation of women with the micro perspective of Blackthorn, I think the way those two things coalesce is very, very strong. And then finally, for the final scene itself, we have Toranaga saying essentially that Blackthorn is going to be safe. Toranaga knows all about Blackthorn's piracy as a result of the Jesuits saying it to him. And Toranaga, in just as many words, says, look, forget about all this. If you're willing to work for me, if you're willing to rise to that particular occasion, I'm going to make sure that no harm is going to be done to you. I think is very, very interesting. And with regards to the external conflict, it's interesting for Blackthorn, and that given that directly follows what he was saying to Mariko, in that he's left his old life behind, and now here is within the space of 90 seconds, a brand new life being basically handed to him. I think all of this, it's a great way of rounding out the bit of, could you say it's a character? Well, I suppose you could say it's a bit of a character arc for Blackthorn in this episode. It's an episodic character arc, and that we do see his further assimilation into this world. And again, with regards to certain ideas being rounded off, I thought this was done very well visually with the swimming sequence between him and Toranaga. You know, it was, whereas the first scene of the episode had Toranaga and Yabushige looking at the sunrise, now we see Toranaga and Blackthorn diving into the water, like they're very literally submerging themselves into a new environment. And I only noticed as well from the rewatch that Mariko says to Blackthorn to not let him win. That's only something I caught on the rewatch. I initially thought she was telling him to just let Toranaga win. I was like, does this moment really need that? But the fact that she says to not let him win, that's like a night and day difference, in that we really show then the mutual level of respect that Blackthorn and Toranaga have for one another. So overall, I thought it was great plot progression for Blackthorn as well as Toranaga. We got just a great payoff for what was set up with the initial conflict. With the initial conflict and just the ongoing conflict. The initial conflict on the assassination attempt of Blackthorn, then the ongoing conflict that Toranaga has, and getting that scene with Hiromatsu approaching the regents and Toranaga buying himself some time. All of this, I think, works so well for payoff for the second episode, and without giving anything away, I think it just acts as such great setup for the succeeding episode. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I've had Audacity brought up right next to me. I don't think I'm adding in any edits to this. I think that basically everything that I've been saying for the last 30 minutes, I'm just leaving it in raw and uncut, and this is just where you're going to get. I didn't know what way this was going to work. I'm surprised I didn't make more mistakes when I was speaking out loud, but there you go. Yeah, this might actually be a bit more of an enjoyable format for me to do these reviews. I don't know. The way I kind of justified is that, not just because I'm a new channel, but just also what I've seen from basically any other reaction channel out there, the people who are going to stay all the way to, like, let's say the last 10 minutes of a reaction channel's review is always going to be like 10% or lower. I know that not only from looking at my own analytics, but also from watching other reaction channels talk about their analytics. It's always going to be such a niche audience for these things that I think if you've made it this long into the video, you're not going to care at this point. That if you're this interested in hearing discussion about the show, then this is pretty much going to be what you can expect. So yeah, that's it. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really, truly appreciate just how many positive interactions I've gotten on the channel so far. Especially for someone like me who, as of today, I've only just hit 30 subscribers. So to get this much support so far is really, it's just really, really lovely to see. So that's it. Thanks for watching.